welcome to the first chat show of the new series. My three guests are all involved in the arts world. An international percussionist, the director of the disability arts organization SHAPE, and a graduate from Gallaudet University in the United States. My first guest, Evelyn Glennie, plays all over the world with some of the finest orchestras and on some of the most famous occasions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Evelyn Glennie. Could we have an interpreter, please? Welcome, Jean. Now, Evelyn, that was from last year at the Proms. Now, was that piece specially composed for you? And I believe the solo performance lasts for 25 minutes, which is quite something, isn't it? was it composed specially for you?
The piece was composed for me, yes. I have probably about 5 or 6 new compositions that are specially written for me for years. So that's quite a lot, and they range from concertos with orchestra, as you've just seen, to recital pieces and duos, so different combinations.
Now, your interest in music continued even after you lost your hearing. How were you able to carry on in the music world?
Well, I'm very stubborn, and I'm very self-centered in that if I have an idea, I just go. And I think people in the music business are not interested as to your background or whether you have one arm or one leg, deaf, blind, whether you're black or white, rich or poor. It doesn't matter. If you can play and if you can deliver the goods, that's what they're concerned about. So basically I learn music by looking at the score, looking at the notation, trying to digest it, trying to interpret it how I want to, as opposed to being influenced by recordings. So everything I play is very much Evelyn. It really is my own performance where I have my own signature on the music. But, you know, people really don't care what you're like or who you are as long as you can play.
Right, now when you were young and you were developing this interest in music, was there any one particular person who encouraged you?
Well, many people encouraged me. All my friends and teachers at school were very, very supportive. And my percussion teacher, Ron Forbes, was very, very encouraging. He helped me find ways to appreciate music in different ways, so approaching music from a different angle, that is really involving your whole body in appreciating sound from other people and other sources, as well as actually producing sound yourself and having complete control over the sound that you're producing. And that of course takes a long time to really develop. It doesn't happen overnight, and it isn't something that you can spend, you know, maybe 8 hours a day in your private room just practicing. You know, you have to sort of go out and really delve into the world of sound, which of course doesn't necessarily only come through your ears. You use every sense possible to play. And probably the most important sense for me in being a musician is touch. because everything I play, I have to actually physically place one surface against the other, and that's how I produce my sound. But the sound has to be imagined within myself, first of all, before I can actually produce that sound.
Now, I'm fascinated by this, because you know that most people who can hear would say it's impossible for a deaf person to do that, because you're working with an orchestra with so many fine instruments and nuances of music, and that would be impossible for a deaf person, and people are fascinated by that. So can you demonstrate to me how we can feel these things?
Well, here I have several instruments of different qualities of sounds. So, for example, this instrument is called a ratchet, and this is what we take to football matches, and it has a very raspy sound. So when I hold it like this, I can actually feel the sound. So if I turn this handle, we get this type of sound. And if you hold it, just not tightly, just really relaxed, then you'll allow the sound to just travel through your hand. Really fast.
I'll use that for black pepper at home, don't I? It's that sort of thing, isn't it?
This one is a Chinese gong, and normally this is placed on a stand or it's hanging up, but I'll just place it here for now, and I'll strike it. And if you hold it again very, very gently and in a relaxed way, you can feel the sound through the tips of your finger. See?
Yes, you certainly can.
And something like this, which is basically a spring. It's like a car spring. You can actually see the sound. So you can see the spring vibrate.
Yes, that's visual sound, I suppose.
Absolutely.
What about, now when you're playing your instruments, I mean, you have control over yourself and you know what you're doing, and that's fine, but how do you actually relate to the violins and the other instruments in the orchestra, cello and so on, and piccolos and flutes? How can you keep in time with everyone? How do you do it?
Well, when I learn my music, I'm learning from a full orchestral score. So I don't just learn my own part. I learn what the cellos are doing, the violins, clarinets, flutes, whatever. And so I know exactly what they're doing. I also position myself so that you can just be aware of all musicians out of the corner of your eye, and also you have direct contact with the conductor. And as a soloist, you lead the way. You dictate the tempo. So you're always leading. You're not necessarily following all the time what the rest of the musicians do. You have to lead the way. That's what being a soloist really is just taking this command and planting your interpretation into the music.
Now, you wrote a book, an autobiography, Sound Vibrations, right? Now, what's fascinating reading that, reading about your experience in music, it mentions nothing about deafness until we get to chapter 8. Now, I can't imagine anyone else writing about their experience without mentioning deafness for so long. Why was it left until so late?
Well, first of all, I wasn't born deaf. I began losing my hearing at the age of 8, and it took me a long time to really digest that my hearing was the problem. I didn't know what the problem was. And also, the way I was brought up was very much isolated, I suppose, in that it was just a normal upbringing on a farm. We had no experience of city life or anything like that. So my parents were very sort of calm about the whole situation, and they didn't make a fuss of it. I didn't make a fuss of it. And so it was very much low key. And you know, that's just the way it is. And fortunately, I suppose that when I lost my hearing, I was still young enough to adapt. If I'd been a teenager or something, I may have gone through great tantrums, but I was actually young enough to adapt. And the time span of actually beginning to lose my hearing and becoming profoundly deaf was long enough for me to really adapt my lifestyle. And I, of course, I was still developing as a child.
Well, Evelyn, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much
you.
indeed. And enjoy your tours around the world. Thank you. Thank you for coming along. And now let's have another glimpse of Evelyn performing. It's not very often that See Hear indulges in the current television fashion of digging up its own past. Today, though, we have the perfect excuse, as my next guest has appeared many times on See Hear over the years, way back as a presenter, but more recently in one of our Christmas shows.
This is a fine mess you got me into. Why couldn't you invite some interesting people for a change?
I don't like these ridiculous clothes. You know I don't like wearing drag.
You're not in drag. I am.
Thought you looked a bit different.
Looks like we're in for another boring evening.
I know, it's my fault. It's always the same. Nobody appreciates me. I do my best, you know.
Oh, shut up. You sound just like Clive Mason.
Well, I've been waiting a long time to respond to that remark. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Maggie Woolley.
Hello.
Well, Maggie, I've been waiting to get back at you for that.
What?
But we'll save it for later, shall we? Now, it's amazing that you're in these Christmas shows and dressed like that. Good heavens, how did you feel doing that?
Oh, I love acting. I started when I was 2, my first acting on stage. But like Evelyn, I was hearing when I was a child. I grew up. I became deaf when I was at drama college. But I continued my love of performing and acting. And then, of course, we started the See Hear program as well.
Now, you've been involved as an actress. You've also been a presenter on See Hear for quite some time. Now that's over, looking back, do you have fond memories of it?
Well, yes, there was this wonderful time. We travelled around the country meeting so many deaf and hard of hearing people. Very exciting time. It's a wonderful job for any deaf person to work in television. You learn so much. Of course, people really don't remember now that this program, See Here, was started with a campaign. Deaf and hard of hearing people campaign for their program. It's wonderful to see so many deaf people now working in television. But I think myself that it's still difficult for deaf people. You can work in deaf programs, but what about the other programs? It's very difficult for deaf people to move around television, so maybe we've got a lot of campaigning still to do.
So how are we going to do
How
that?
do we campaign? I think you have to talk to the Deaf Broadcasting Council again about that.
Okay, Maggie, now I know that you've always had a love of the arts all through your life. Now, what made you decide to go to drama college in the end?
Oh, it's just a natural thing to do. Very, very like Evelyn Glennie. You have your love, you have your interest, and you'll stay with it. I think for me, becoming deaf was a bit of a break. I had to find a new direction. I learned sign language and got involved in television. But it was really good eventually to go back to the live arts and to theatre, music, dance, and everything like that.
So your love for arts has never diminished, and I know that 5 years ago you took on a new job as the director of SHAPE.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been an interesting time for you since that started?
Oh, SHAPE. That's the thing, we were SHAPE. That's an arts organisation that specifically tries to help people who are left out from the arts. Disabled people, mentally ill people, elderly people. It's very difficult. There's a barrier there, a lot of discrimination. Simply sometimes a matter of being difficult to go to the theatre, difficult to get involved in your particular art form, very difficult to get training. So SHAPE is very much about access and encouraging access for a whole range of people. Very, very happy to say that, of course, we do a lot of work now with deaf and hard of hearing people. It's been wonderful to be involved in encouraging deaf people to achieve their ambitions in the arts.
Now, since you arrived at SHAPE, there have been quite a lot of changes, haven't there? Can you give me an example of what sort of changes there have been?
I think if you ask the people I work with, the biggest change for them was I had to learn sign language. And of course, we started to use interpreters in our work. And when we started to use interpreters, and you had me, one deaf person working there, then other deaf people realized that SHAPE could help them. So they were coming to us and asking for us to start working with deaf people.
Now, you mentioned interpreters, and things are beginning to change there. We're getting more and more hearing theatre performances that are made accessible to deaf people because of interpretation. Now, what's your view of that sort of thing? Do you like it?
My personal view about interpreted theatre is wonderful. If you remember, 25 years ago, I was a drama student. I was going to the theatre 3 times a week. I was going to the theatre. I could hear it. And then I became deaf, so I lost interest. Then 5 or 6 years ago, when they started interpreted theatre, wow, if I'd been born again. So personally, I love it. And there are lots of deaf people who like it as well. But I don't think that's the only thing that we want. Interpreted theatre gives us access to hearing people's theatre. But we have our own theatre. We have deaf theatre. We have our own sign language theatre, sign song and poetry, and our own art forms. What I would really like to see in future is a national deaf theatre, to have our own building where we have our own studio with our own art and so on.
Well, what about integrated theatre? We had an item, the Show of Hands Theatre Company, which is an integrated company. What do you think of that sort of thing?
I think it's important for us to have the opportunity to work with hearing people because they have far more opportunity in theatre, so they learn more, and we can learn from them. But it's important that if you have integrated theatre, that deaf people can understand the sign language, and it's important that deaf people can have control over what happens in that integrated theatre.
Okay, Maggie, I enjoy your new articles in the See Here magazine. I think that's great fun. Are you going to continue with that? Tell me what's happening.
Well, I'm supposed to write that column every month, and it has to be funny. So I've got my little notebook. I'm writing everything that's funny. If you're nice to me, Clive, I'll write about you in my diary.
I'll have to respond to you yet again then. Maggie, thank you very much for coming along. Maggie Woolley. Well, it's really a program for raiding the archives today. My final guest is well known to us all on See Here. Paddy Ladd. He was with me a year ago, just before he set off for the New World to study deaf culture at Gallaudet University. You know, at the moment, deaf and hearing people keep using these words, deaf culture, all the time, but what does it actually mean? I think it's important for one person to try and pull all these ideas together and publish them. I think that's vital, really. I mean, deaf culture, some people think means flashing doorbells and environmental aids. Some people think deaf culture means the way we attract each other's attention by tapping each other on the shoulder. Some people think deaf culture is something to do with you can't get deaf people out of the deaf club at closing time at night because they all want to carry on talking to each other. Trying to get all these things together. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Paddy Ladd. Well, Paddy, welcome back. Have you been suffering from culture shock over there, do you think? Well, I've just arrived really 3 weeks ago back here, and I'm still not very sure, because England seems to be very dark and dirty and crowded, really. And it's interesting that people have said this, you know, use these words culture shock to me. I'm not sure what they mean, but it has happened to me, yes. It really has struck home. Okay, amazing. Right, now, last year we all bid you farewell as you flew across to America, and we were all waiting to see what was going to come out of it, what was happening over there with all this research at Gallaudet. Now you've come back, now's our opportunity. You brought it back with you. So what does deaf culture mean? Have you found out? Where do I start? I went to America and decided I would interview deaf people who had experience in Britain and America and compare their experiences. And I pointed a camera at them and transcribed everything they said. Lots of different people. And what really struck me and really surprised me too were people saying, if you see, oh, by the way, if you see me doing ASL, I mean using American signs, I'm sorry, but that's the way I'm going to have to do it. I'm still trying to switch back from American signing to British signing. Listen to the man. So I'm doing these American signs. I haven't fully converted back to, so I might do half and half. All right, I'm sorry about that if I do. Now, we transcribed everything they'd said, and deaf people from England who went to America felt, you know, in touch with deaf people from America, and you know, you would think it would be very easy, but it wasn't really. You'd think people would have the same culture, but there are differences. For example, if you arrived in America and you went to meet American deaf people and you were introduced, when you're introduced, you give your name, you spell it out, you tell them what your job is, where you're from, and so on. Then you say hello, and you move on from there. But British deaf people don't do that. They just say hello and start conversing with each other and then go away. I mean, people don't even know each other's names here. So it's a completely different way of doing things in America. Can you tell me what, you know, generally culture means, deaf culture particularly? Another easy question, Clive, thanks very much. Now, if you look at culture, it can mean by itself buildings, clothing, food that people eat. But I had a different view from that. I mean, to answer your question, you're Scottish, aren't you? Yes, so's Evelyn. Okay, fine. So as Scots, what's the difference between Scottish and English cultures, hearing cultures? What's the difference? In my own personal experience, for me, I think it's New Year time, pub life. And people in Scotland, I think, are very close and have a pride. Now, what about you, Evelyn?
Money.
Money, right. That's not true, come on. Okay, Paddy, now carry on. Now, culture means, you know, what you have in your mind from your experience from growing up, from Scotland and England, for example. You know, what differences there are between Scotland and England are probably quite small. But inside, you feel very strongly that you're Scottish because you grew up there. You've also got Scottish history and behaviour, which is somewhat different. Similarly, deaf people who grew up in deaf schools have their view of the world, which is completely different from the hearing view of the world, if you like. Yeah. But how does this bear any relationship to culture through the arts? I mean, have you got anything that you picked up from Paddy,
I
Maggie?
think Paddy's research is very important for us because the things he discovers about deaf culture are very important for us to translate into our theatre, our visual arts and so on. If I have understood your definition of culture right.
Yeah. Now, Evelyn, what about it? Is there such a thing as music culture?
Absolutely. I think that our awareness of world music at the present time is so profound, and it's incredible how nowadays you can walk into a record store and find so many different styles of music, and now the styles are beginning to integrate, and the access we have to different countries allows us to really very quickly and easily digest other cultures. So it's just a wonderful thing, and we can all hand our experiences over to young people of all sorts, and it really is great.
Paddy? Now, you're going to do some more research at Bristol University. Do you want any feedback from the audience now? I mean, anything you want to say now to the audience? Well, I think it is important that we deaf people work together to try to research and find out what is actually in our minds. Not just on cultural things, but how do we explain what's inside us? And the best thing, I think, is to get together with people who have deaf parents and people who grew up with hearing parents and try to put it all down and be able to show hearing people that's what's inside us and that's how our lives are affected. Paddy, thank you very much indeed for coming along today. Thank you. It's been absolutely fascinating. Well, that's all we've got time for today. A really big thank you to all my guests, Maggie Woolley, Paddy Ladd and Evelyn Glennie. I do hope you've enjoyed the show, and do join us again next week. Bye-bye.